Good morning, everyone, and welcome back. My name is Luis Merchant. I am the co-founder and CEO of Venturo, and I'm joined here by my esteemed colleague and friend, Chris Palmer. Chris is a former member of the Air Force Academy. He graduated there. He's a serial entrepreneur who has a very diverse background, and we thought it would be very interesting to have a conversation with him about his very unique career and path to serial entrepreneurship. So, Chris, welcome, my friend.
Hey, good morning. How are you, Luis?
Good, man. So, let's get started. Let's talk about a little bit. I want to ask you, dive right in, and ask you. You worked for many years in retail, and then you decided to go out and work for your own. What made you make that change? What was the moment when you decided to stop working for others and start working for yourself?
Yeah, you're right. I worked in retail for about 12 years, and a lot of great things about retail. Wasn't anything around community. Companies I worked for were good companies, gave me lots of opportunity. What you probably don't know, or maybe you do know, I don't know. I actually had a business before retail that I had failed at. And so that's kind of how I landed in retail. Was I was very young, thought I'd go and conquer the world in business, and I went and bought my first business, and it just did not go well. It was 2005 and 6 during the kind of the downfall of housing industry, and I was in housing. It was a construction related business. And so I really was in retail for 12 years, just thinking, well, business was not something that was meant for me. I was just meant to go work for someone else. And again, was okay, successful in retail. They gave me promotions. They gave me all the accolades I was looking for. So probably really held on to retail for 4 more years because of that. In the back of my mind, the entire time, I'd always wanted to get back into business, but really was too afraid to maybe take the step. A lot of people always ask me that kind of question. And I always tell them I really didn't see a future any other way. It was something that nagged at me so much that even with all the accolades, even with all the job promotions and winning at corporate world, I could not see another way of living my life unless I was working for myself and pursuing my own passions and building my own future.
Yeah, that's amazing. You're absolutely right. So you got into construction work, into construction. You were building homes, as I remember, and you went from one to then two to then five,
Yeah.
and then the financial crisis of 2008 hit, and you had massive challenges. Couldn't sell the properties, had a massive note. I think you
Yeah.
remember you telling me like it was this month. It was the last month that I had to pay. I had to get a
Yeah.
job. I was gonna go bankrupt, right?
Yeah. It was really unfortunate. It's my first year of my marriage. So I thought I was going to go into year one of my marriage, pretty easy. But unfortunately, you had that kind of financial stress. It was tough. Yeah, we were building about 25 homes a year. We were doing some commercial construction. I mean, it was typical. Who gives 25-year-old that kind of money? I don't know. But I had an older business partner that knew how to build homes. And so I really went into the business saying, I'll work for free. And I think my business partner at the time kind of understood that I was pretty good at selling homes and working with people on them. So I brought something to the table and we quickly scaled it. And when the housing kind of slowed, what really happened was the banks came to us and said, "Hey, look, I know that this week you have a draw on your money for your construction. Things are getting kind of squirrely in the economy. We need to come look at some things." And long story short, I had about 12 homes that I was paying for monthly. And you're right, it was about 18 months. I'd still owned one home and I was just making the payments on the house. I never filed bankruptcy, but I got as close as you get, maxed out credit cards, zero money in the bank. Really, retail saved me at that point because I was going into retail and just trying to survive at that point. And I think it was honestly a great lesson learned. I grew up upper middle class. My father, I went to the Air Force Academy. I felt like I did a lot of things right. This was the first time in my life I'd really failed at a massive level. And I appreciate that much more 10 years later, 20 years later than I ever did at the time. At the time, I was devastated, but I really draw from that failure. And I actually, with my own kids, I really try to exercise that muscle with them is being comfortable in failure. Cause I think that when you're doing something in life, like buying a business or you're trying to make a life change that really has some risk to it, you have to be a little more comfortable with some risk. Just there's different variables, different degrees of risk, but I think you have to get comfortable with that. And it's not a natural a natural thing to be good at, I guess.
Yeah,
Look,
no, totally. But you made it through. So then you went through retail. Then you decided, okay, it's been a decade, almost a decade working up the corporate ladder. You decide, okay, I want to work for myself. Now you were looking for a business. So how did you
yeah.
find the first one? What did you buy, by the way?
Yeah, I bought hair salons. It was not on the
Hair
first 50
salons.
items I looked at. People don't at a dinner party, no one's going, "Oh, you own a hair salon?" But, I got to know the guys at Great Clips really well, really quickly. I looked at a bunch of businesses. I did what everyone does, right? I went to Ventura wasn't around 10 years ago, but I went to I went to Franchise Gator, all the places you go, and I'd filled out, like, everything, top 10 of everything. Really had kinda threw it all out there, and what had actually happened was my father had passed away, and I kinda just shelved the idea and thought, that I'm dealing with these things, and my father passing away, getting my mother in a good place, and I was actually getting a haircut at Great Clips, right before Christmas, and then anybody who works in retail, that's a very busy time of year, you're working quite a bit of hours, and so I was just trying to think of myself, in the chair, it's like a moment of quietness when you're getting your hair cut. I don't know how you are, I almost fall asleep at it sometimes, but I was checking out of the Great Clips, and I had my hand on the door, and I just spent 10 minutes in this chair thinking about, "Gosh, this is hard work, and I gotta figure something else out differently." And it'd been on my mind a lot, and I had looked at my phone as I had my hand on the door at the Great Clips, and I had an email from Great Clips that had just been sent 2 minutes prior. It said, "Hey, are you still interested in a franchise? If you are, great. If you're not, we're gonna remove your name. It's been 2 years." So, that was a 2-year process from when I thought I was gonna start to when I actually started. And so I walked out in the car and I just took the first step, which was just really make the phone call. And, you know, looking back, we got to 15 salons and, co-op president of Great Clips franchisee of the year. It was quite a whirlwind for a few years, but that was my first business was Great Clips franchise salons.
And you got
And,
15 of them. So it took you 2
yeah, I mean, you open and close some. It was really 18. We had a couple in the works, and I sold my half of the business, but I had a business partner, and we had about 15, I'd say, at the time. So yeah,
Okay, so you went into franchising. I'm sure we could spend a long time talking about franchising, how to make those successful. 15 of them multi-unit, that's a lot of responsibility. And then you decided to expand and you invested in a boat company in Turks and Caicos. I think I remember
yeah,
when you told me about this. I was like, absolutely not.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, people will tell you buying a boat's like the worst investment ever, and I'd probably tend to agree with them honestly. Although now I'm in the business, you see some people actually do well with them. I was on a vacation just on a boat, and I thought to myself, I was ready to buy another business, and I thought, if I'm going to buy a business, I really want to buy a business that's like a lot of fun. A hair salon's great. Had 100 plus employees. It's open 7 days a week. It's 8 to 9 p.m. You're working days before Thanksgiving. Very similar to retail, kind of opposite of people's work schedule, if you will, right? Nights and weekends type of thing, and very people intensive. And I thought, this is a great business. And like anything, I was getting on Biz Buy Sell, looking at everything, and I refer to them again because they didn't have Ventura at the time. So very little information to really go off of, just kind of some stale listings. But I had run into one business for sale specifically that said Turks and Caicos. I had no idea where Turks and Caicos was. I was on a business trip in New York, and so I decided to fly from New York instead of coming home from a business meeting with Macy's. I flew straight to Turks and Caicos and met the gentleman that had the business. I actually didn't buy that business. I don't know if you know that. I actually was outbid on that business. He sold it for around 5 times, which was above what I was willing to pay for it. But I learned the business in the process and decided I could maybe start my own. And so that's what we did. We started a business from scratch.
Okay, and you started Poseidon.
Yeah, yeah. So we do high-end luxury charters in Turks and Caicos. We're probably one of the top 3 brands there on the island. Turks and Caicos, timing wise, was great for me because it's a very posh place that people want to go to now. And so we work with, I don't even know, 50 hotels, 150 plus concierges around the world. We do celebrity charters. We do a lot of things that are, high net worth individuals there. And it's been a great business. It's given me a lot more freedom than maybe the franchising did, where franchise was a great model for just kind of, helping me with the guardrails on some things. Poseidon was really probably my first like true start from scratch, do it the way you want to do it. There's really no rules here, type of thing. So
But let me ask you something. I'm interested in a comment you just made. So at the time you had Great Clips growing, you launched Poseidon in Turks and Caicos based on a model of business that you saw and you liked, and you're like, I want to buy a boat and like build that business in Turks and Caicos. And you were still working full time for a company?
I was, yeah, I'd left Macy's at that time. I don't know if you remember, just again, great opportunity, great people. It's just where the path was going to take me was not where I wanted to be. And I think what really drove me in the business, going into the business, was I was in an industry that I did not feel comfortable being in 10 years from now. And I think a lot of people are going to probably be in the same situation. With AI coming, a lot of change happening. Anytime I'm buying a business, I'm trying to figure out, like, what's this business going to be in 15 years?
Yeah.
Something that's going to get phased out? Is it something that's going to grow more? And so I was really hedging my bets against that. So yeah, I did have other jobs, but at that point I was working in private equity. I'd gotten recruited by a friend of mine who'd sold his business to private equity. And so I was there more as a process improvement operations guy. And they really actually taught me quite a bit about financials. So profit and loss statements, balance sheets, cash flow statements, which honestly, I always tell people, if you haven't spent any time with that, get on YouTube, go somewhere, spend some time digesting those types of documents, because you're going to spend time in those documents or those types of documents, either when you try to build your own for your own business or review a business and understand how that business works.
Yeah, I totally agree, man. I think they're the basics of running a business. Those financial statements that you talked about, but also I think the good learning from here that I want to highlight is that you can do both, right? While you're
Yeah.
working full time and you're making the transition into business ownership, you could do both. Have one step on each side while you're getting your feet wet. You just gotta have a big commitment. I guess how do you keep a balance between all these businesses and having a full time job? You do until you said, okay, my time is like there's only so much time,
Yeah.
right?
And there's a time when you start to figure out what your time is worth per hour, and you understand that not necessarily that you've replaced your income, but what the opportunity cost is that you're losing, because most people who are going to buy a business, they're probably making six figures plus a year, which is why they have the income to buy that business. People aren't going to pay you that kind of money to just casually work 30 hours a week. Some people have that situation. A lot of people don't. They have a real job. They have real responsibility. So you have to really weigh, okay, if I was to take all this mental capacity and turn it towards my business and really focus on it, either through, better operations, better expansion, better people management, where are you going to take the business? And again, I look at a lot of businesses from a growth mindset. And so I'm always looking at, you know, how are we growing top line sales? How are we controlling bottom line margin?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it became a point of just distraction for me. It wasn't a dollar for dollar thing. I think a lot of people make the money and they think, okay, when I make exactly the same amount of money, that's when I'll stop working and make the switch. And, you make changes in your life. Maybe your spouse helps you or something like that. You do those types of things.
Yeah. Maybe you make a little bit less, but now you have all this free time that allows you
Yeah,
to
I tell
go
people all the
one
time,
step back to take 10 steps forward. Yeah.
yeah, and really, you have to be a self-starter. I tell people all the time, I live a 65-year-old man's life. I mean, after we're done with this interview, I'm going to go on a 2-hour bike ride. I would have never done that 10 years ago, right? I would have worked 6 days a week, 12-hour days. And I like to work, by the way. I really do. There are times to work hard, and there's times to take some time. I'm 11 years into this now, so I have some time like that. But you got to be a self-starter. No one's going to tap me on the shoulder and say, hey, now you have to go work today for 4 hours and finish these projects, right? So there's some balance there. There's definitely freedoms. Entrepreneurship has a lot of pluses. It has a lot of negatives. I think people have to understand that. I pay myself last. You know that. That
Yeah.
beside the business we're talking about, I didn't pay myself in that business for 2.5 years, I think. The Gray Clips business, you asked, I was working a job. I didn't pay myself in that business for 3 years because I was using that money to expand and buy more locations. I knew when I wanted to move to that next thing, I was trying to put my money back in my business and expand. Well, that all costs money, right? So I used my business or my job to really fund my life, and my business to fund my businesses. And then I made that switch eventually.
All right. So based on that, man, let's talk about that. Some of the things to look for when you're buying a business. You're evaluating a business, you're ready to make a decision. What
Sure.
do you have for people that are going to do this for the first time? What should you look for when you're buying a business?
Yeah. So I think they first need to understand what they're trying to get out of the acquisition. Are they looking for cash flow? I want to buy a laundromat that makes me X amount of dollars, and that's what they want to do. They're looking for just cash flow and free time. Again, I look for growth, and I like to grow things. I like to build things. The excitement of that, maybe that's the old ADD in me or something. But I am always looking for a business that I feel like in the next 10 or 15 years is still going to be a great business, because I am looking to grow that business. I want to make sure that that business has upward trajectory there, either through acquisition, consolidation with competitors, new markets, whatever it is. That's what I'm looking at first and foremost. The second thing for me, or that was the first one. The first one's the future. The second one's the expansion. What does expansion look like for me? Because mine is growth. The third one is probably just more how it fits with my family. I tend to want to work very hard, and I used to tell people if I could make X amount of dollars selling pencils on the side of the road, I would do it. I think as I've gotten a little older, I do try to weigh, work life or balance with my family. So I do try to really understand, where am I going to fit in that business? What's it going to look like? I am very cognizant of the fact that I don't want to work in the business on a day to day long term. When you acquire a business, you certainly have a learning curve there, and you've got to lean in pretty hard. But I'm usually looking at what that executive team looks like, or that leadership team looks like, where those processes in place. Can I put processes in place? And so for me, am I going to work in this business every day? Or am I going to be able to build something that's going to be a business that I can, you know, spend 5 to 10, 15 hours a week in that business as needed, and work on it, focus on the expansion of it, that type of thing.
Yeah, I love that, man. I mean, we talked about this many times before, right? It doesn't have to be like, I am passionate about cars and I want to get into auto repair. No, it's more like, I'm looking for these type of these indicators that tell me there's going to be growth, there's going to be cash flow. I'm going to be able to have independence of time, freedom of time. That's the type of business. You never thought you were going to do hair salons. You never thought you were going to do boats, but now you're doing all of those. And by the way, you're also a little bit in many, many other things at this point. We only covered the two biggest ones.
Yeah, yeah,
But that's a great advice. So look for these things before you're looking for a specific type of industry. It's more like, is there
yeah.
a future? Is there growth?
Yeah, and I think here's the thing. I mean, I was that person, right? You get on the computer, there's 200 listings. I would investigate all of them, even if you're half interested. You'd be amazed how many conversations. I don't know how many times I've had a conversation with someone about something totally unrelated, but then I went and looked at a new opportunity, and that was kind of filed in my back of my mind a little bit, and I connected those dots. I think that's what I'm pretty good at, is connecting dots
Yeah.
that don't really seem related. And I think a lot of people are that way. When they look back on their life, they'd say, well, this happened to me and this happened to me. And that's how I connected these things. And I would say that's the same thing in buying a business. It's much more sophisticated than buying a house, but people do it when they buy a home, right? They go look at 10 homes. They decide the pluses and minuses.
Yeah.
Businesses is kind of similar in that regard, but much more moving parts. And you might find yourself maybe half interested in something, but as you get to know the team, or you get to know the location, or the strategy, or what the owner really does on a day-to-day basis, you can get real passionate about things. I'll give you an example. In the last 12 months, I've looked at a catering business, $4.5–5 million a year in revenue. I've looked at a dog daycare business, same thing, 4+ million a year in revenue. I'm looking at a manufacturing company in Asia right now that's got some financial problems, but might be an opportunity. It might not be. I'm going to learn about it. Looked at a window siding business, large scale company. The man died unexpectedly, 30+ million a year in revenue. Am I passionate about any of those things? No, but am I passionate about the team I get to know and the processes and what the goal is? Yeah, 100%. And you kind of evaluate those things. I'd have people all the time. The first thing they ask me is, how do you make the decision to buy the business, and what do you go do? And I always tell people, you certainly want to take stock of what you're good at, and understand, like, if I'm a people person, I'm probably okay with a people business. I might not be a great accounting firm guy, because I want to be out in front of people, right? Or I don't like being in front of people, but I need to have a great number two that's that person for me, because I'm not a great people leader, and that's okay. But you better have a great number two for you that does that for you. So
Yeah, totally. And then what about red flags? A couple of red flags to highlight. What are some things that you look at and you're like, I'm running away. I'm not buying.
I don't like low margin businesses. I know that that's a pretty cliche thing to say, but when you're in a business sometimes and you're excited about the opportunity, and it does $1 million a year in revenue, and you see that number and you think that's a great number, and they make about 50,000 a year, that's a low margin business. There's a lot of risk in my mind there that if things go wrong, you don't have any give. Now, that being said, again, going back to profit and loss statements, standing, if the $1 million a year revenue is just their fixed cost, and the next dollar that you gain is a 60 cents to the bottom line, and you're a growth guy like me, then you see opportunity in that, because it only makes 50,000 a year. It's going to be a low price point business, but if I can grow it, it's worth way more money for me. Right.
Yeah.
So that's where that
You
financial
see
literacy
opportunities.
comes in.
You
What?
see opportunities even on the red flags.
Yeah, I mean, well, yeah. If the low margin is just because they're covering fixed costs. Another one's probably seller's mindset. That doesn't mean to say that you don't spend the time. My best acquisitions have been with the hardest sellers, because frankly, no one else would work with them. So I say that kind of haphazardly, and I say that, but I also, looking back, realize that some of my best acquisitions were with some of the hardest sellers. And when I say hard, I mean very indecisive about if they wanted to sell, very closed-minded about sharing information. And, it's a long process. If you think you're just gonna get a book report and just gonna look at it, make the decision, that's not what it is. I mean, some of these conversations, some of my acquisitions have taken, and this probably isn't a great thing, but over a year of many coffees and conversations. And,
Yeah.
people are selling something that's their pride and joy, their life's work. They wanna know if they're gonna sell it to someone good, that's gonna take it and do something with it.
Yeah.
A lot of times, not always. Sometimes people just want the most money, but that's probably another red flag for me. Is just the seller's really not ready to sell it, and it's not going anywhere.
What about Venturo? How do you think, like just very quickly, what do you think a marketplace like Venturo does for buyers? How does it change the landscape?
I think it's common knowledge. Maybe it's not. I mean, everyone hears the baby boomer analogy, right? And so if you think about, I think the numbers are 2% of all people own a business. So if you take baby boomer retirements, and you say 2% of those people own businesses, there's a lot of hand changing that has to happen with these companies and small businesses, especially because what happens is, someone's in their 60s, 70s, their net worth is wrapped in their business. It's not always as easy as just leaving it to your kids because you have to live on something, right? So I think Venturo is really came at a great time because the opportunity to transition businesses into new ownership is, I think, probably the greatest it's been in the last 50 years, in the next 5 to 10 years. I mean, now is the time to buy. There's not enough people to probably buy everything that's going to be for sale. And some of them won't even sell. They'll just shut their doors. So I think Venturo was positioned really great when it comes to that. I don't know if he did that on purpose, but that's great timing. If you look at, I think of Biz buy sell and or your competitors. Again, I say that because that's where I used to go. It's kind of like the old realtor.com versus the new, realtor.com. And I think you guys have taken more of an approach of this is an ecosystem that you come into and you don't know a lot about it. There's financing, there's how do you evaluate the business value, there's a lot of different elements to just buying the business, right? Just because you decide you want to buy a business, there's a lot more steps than just, I'm buying a business. There has to be financing, yes or no, a lot of questions. And so there's a lot of hand holding that needs to happen. And no one's really kind of packaged that up on a large scale across the internet. You can certainly go find a broker and pay a broker, a fee to do that. But I think even the brokers were using other platforms and really kind of limited on that as well. And so I think that's probably where the key is for you guys, and that's what I'm excited about for you, obviously, the timing and just the hand holding of the process.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
All right, my friend. Thanks so much for sharing your story. Hopefully, we'll do more of these. I'm sure people are going to be interested in learning how to do franchising, how to start a business, how to acquire
Yeah.
a business. We may bring you back, man. I really appreciate the time, and I hope you have a great one, man. Talk soon.
Yeah. Thanks, bud. Nice to see you, Luis.